Welcome back to Face the Nation. We continue our conversation now with Chris Krebs and Kara Swisher. Kara, I want to pick up with you. We've been talking about social media. Twitter may find a new buyer, billionaire Elon
probably.
Musk.
Friday.
On Friday's a day, I believe.
Supposedly.
Senator Mark Warner, who chairs the Intel Committee, has said that there is no American more dependent upon the largesse of the Communist Party than Elon Musk. He's the CEO of Tesla, SpaceX, the rocket ships. Bloomberg saying that the administration is going to have to do national security reviews, potentially, of businesses he owns.
Sure.
So how much of a risk is it if this transaction goes through?
It depends on what they find, I guess. You know, I mean, I think the issue is he already does a lot of defense work, a lot with the rockets and everything else, and is considered very innovative and has done amazing things. The International Space Station depends on Elon Musk and his rockets. And so he does a lot of, obviously with transportation, that's another area that's important to look at, and who owns it. And Twitter also, this is a big communications platform, even though it's a terrible business. So who owns it matters. And so who are his investors, who is putting money into it, et cetera, should be looked at. It's as a matter of course.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost kind of amazing, Chris, that there isn't more scrutiny. I mean, there is FCC scrutiny of ownership of news organizations. Right. When it comes to social media and a company like TikTok, it's owned by a Chinese firm. An increasing number of Americans are relying on it for actual news, not just tweeting about themselves, but actual news. Is this a risk?
Well, I think just to your point, as more people use these platforms, as they get more information, as they're shifting away from traditional media that we're all used to, the intelligence services of our adversary are seeing this shift as well. And so it's not necessarily specifically about TikTok. It's all platforms and it's all avenues. But TikTok represents a specific risk. And a colleague of mine wrote a paper, Dakota Carey wrote a paper for Cyberscoop, talking about how it's not necessarily the data security challenges. It's that the Chinese Communist Party may have the ability through the parent company of TikTok to actually shape narratives, suppress, lift, shape what we see on a daily basis. And it doesn't have to be everything you see all the time. Mm-hmm. It can just be enough. Yeah. It can just be enough, a little bit. And I think about what happens if the Chinese invade Taiwan. What happens in the run-up to the 24 election if they're not happy with some of the more, the stronger stance that this administration is taking against China? There's a significant amount of risk exposure we have here.
And then who owns Twitter? Who are his investors? I think that's a normal question for a government to ask. Mm-hmm. The CCP doesn't own CBS, to my knowledge, so.
The Chinese Communist Party, no. But for Elon Musk, I know you know him, and last question here on this. Russia watcher Fiona Hill said, Putin plays the egos of big men, gives them a sense that they can play a role, but in reality, they're just direct transmitters of messages from Vladimir Putin. She just gutted Elon Musk when he was pushing pro-Russia positions. I mean, is it really that? I mean, are our adversaries using business icons to further their foreign policy?
Why, yes, that's happened before. I don't know if you've heard about President Donald Trump. I mean, people have talked about that. So, yeah, I think Elon's doing this on his own. But he's a lot of people in Silicon Valley are also mouthing the same thing. There's sort of a certain class of tech bros that are into this idea.
But you still think this transition?
Well, they have no foreign policy experience, so they have no business doing this. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't stop them, which is about everything. They're experts on everything. Because they're the richest people in the world, in case you didn't know. So I think it's slightly dangerous. I don't know, Chris.
A little bit.
We could keep talking about this. I want to keep talking about this, but I have to take a break here and bring some important information to you from voters themselves, actually. We wanted to better understand how Americans could impact the vote in the year's elections. And our CBS News Campaign 2020 I-22, sorry, it's moving quickly. I in America is tracking 4 groups of what we are calling election influencers. And on Friday, we spoke to some pressured parents. These are voters who describe themselves as feeling post-pandemic stress over finances and kids.
I feel like Biden is doing a pretty good job, but my concern is like the crime. I want to know what exactly will they do about this, because it's out of control in Chicago.
What about in Arkansas and Texas?
I live more in the suburbs, so it's not as prevalent in my neighborhood, but it's still something that's concerning.
Not so much. Greg Abbott, our governor, does a great job. And the only thing, that we've been having trouble with is, the border.
So immigration is a concern for you in these upcoming elections.
Here we just left a pandemic. When you have thousands upon thousands every day crossing over, they don't have to get tested. We don't know what they're bringing in.
Well, some of those pandemic era restrictions are still in place along the border. What do you need to see that would change your impression of immigration in this country?
I really liked how DeSantis and Abbott have been taking them and shipping them out to bluer states so they can recognize the problems that we've been having in Texas and in Arizona. Greg Abbott needs to have a lot more control over the border itself.
But you will still vote Republican?
Yes.
In this
I
upcoming...
still support Greg Abbott because he's running up against Beto, and he's all about the open border.
Show of hands, will all of you accept the election results from these midterm races in 2022? Yes? All of you trust the elections and the systems to run them. How would all of you describe the current state of the US economy?
Oh, I would say scary.
Scary.
Yes.
LaShawn, how would you describe it?
I would say it's unstable because it's just so much going on.
John, in one word, how would you describe the US economy?
Horrible.
Horrible.
In regards with inflation. I watched last week a bag of 6-ounce broccoli go from $1.99 to this week being $2.49.
Can I see a show of hands? Is anyone driving less because of the cost of gasoline? So you're still filling up your gas tank and still driving despite prices climbing higher.
Just to go to work, I drive 11 hours to go to
Wow.
work. I live in East Texas, work in New Mexico. So I have to buy it regardless.
Have high prices changed the way you live your life?
I still have to do whatever I need to do to get around, but I don't know, what can you do? You have to just adjust. It's not just the, heating, the cost of living, the electricity, everything is just, it's just really high.
So John and Stephanie, have you had to make changes in your life because of inflation?
Yes,
What have you done?
we have cut back on our going out to eat, kind of eliminated Amazon Prime, Netflix, limiting that kind of stuff. I've looked for ways to budget better with groceries.
Do you think that President Biden has control or greater influence over the economy?
I think it's just as much Congress and also state and local as it is Biden. I don't think it's just one person.
What are your biggest concerns about raising children in America right now? John?
The whole woke culture affecting our children. All these elementary schools and middle schools having woke culture pushed on them from the LGBT plus community for sexual identity and gender. We should be pushing the actual school studies, math, social studies, science, not, gender studies or sexual identifications.
What have you seen that makes you concerned?
In the district that I live in, there hasn't been really anything going on. But I'm originally from Iowa, and just recently there was some protests at an Iowa school for bringing in a transgender art show.
So you're not concerned about your kids in Texas. You're seeing this on the news. That's what's raising your concern?
Yes.
LaShawn, I'd like to get you to weigh in on this.
I can also agree with some of his points. I really would say sex education. I feel like some things, are brought to the children's attention they wouldn't even think about.
And you have 8 kids. I imagine you have some pretty specific ideas in your mind when you're speaking
Yes, I
about
do.
this.
Yes. But children are, they're really influenced. You can teach them one thing at home, but when they go to school, they're just as much influenced by their teachers and their surroundings. And we should have more input, the parents, of what we want them to learn.
Stephanie, what's your biggest concern? And if you want to react to any of that, go ahead.
I agree. The other issue has to do with COVID. There's less teachers in the school district. And because of that, they have student choice school days. So the students can choose whether or not they want to go to school that day because there's not enough teachers or bus drivers to get them there. And so I worry about their education.
When you said your top issue was crime, what did you have in mind?
Robberies and, murders, stabbings. And it's like every time you turn on the news, somebody killed their baby and they're losing their mind. It's like people are everywhere doing everything, and it's like they're out of control. Nobody's stopping them.
John talked about how concerned he was about the border in his state of Texas and migrants coming into the country.
I mean, there's nothing wrong with helping, but we have more problems here in our country. I feel like there's so much focus on helping immigrants, and it's not enough focus on the people here that might need assistance.
Do you blame your mayor and your governor for that, or do you blame Washington for that?
It's everybody, everyone. Washington, the mayor. I mean, it's like they help who they want. Certain people, certain groups of people, they'll help them, and then they'll neglect someone else.
Often when we do these focus groups, we have people from different party affiliations disagreeing with each other, but I'm hearing all of you echo a lot of the same concerns and agreeing with each other. None of you are very optimistic about the country right now.
No.
We'll be right back. For a closer look on that additional release from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve and its impact on prices, we're joined by Amos Hochstein, the Special Presidential Coordinator for International Energy Affairs. Good morning. Good to have you back here. President Biden has released more oil from the SPR than all previous presidents combined. Republicans are saying this is depleting the stockpile into national security risk. When you were last here, you said that this would end towards the end of the year. Did you know then that 3 weeks before the election, there was going to be a release?
Well, first, it's good to be here. Thank you for having me again. Before I came here last time, the president was in the middle already of releasing 180 million barrels. This is still part of that 180 million barrels. So the announcement that was made the other day is because it takes some time to get those barrels released, and these barrels will be released in December. The president's been committed to bringing down gasoline prices. When you mentioned when I was here last, we talked about then prices were coming down from $5 and we were about $4.50. Today they're at $3.80 or $3.79. And in fact, most Americans see prices around $3.40 to $3.50. So he's been committed to bringing those prices down, and this release is just part of that process.
And he says he may do more. But when we last spoke, you said private industry was expected to pick it up, and so that you wouldn't have to keep doing these emergency releases. Why isn't that working?
Well, I think it is working. The private industry is increasing supply
then why would he have
and
to
production.
Do more releases?
Well, what the president said is that we are going to be very watchful to see what happens around the world. There are a lot of geopolitical events, the Russian invasion. I don't know what Putin's going to do in December or in January. So we have to be ready for that. So what the president said is we're going to complete the 180 that he has announced many months ago, as he's been doing monthly. That will continue on into December. And then as we are making sure that we are prepared, so if we need to do additional releases, we can do them very, very quickly.
There's going to be a European ban on Russian crude imports on December 5th. That's going to have an impact globally. How much of a shock is that going to have on energy prices ahead of the holidays?
Well, I think that's exactly what we're talking about, right? So the president made this release, announced this release that will happen in December, around the time that the ban comes in. We're also working with Europe and other G7 partners around the world, countries in Asia, to see if we can make sure that we continue to have the Russian barrels on the market, but ensure that the price and the revenues that Russia gets continue to be depressed.
This is the price cap you're trying to roll out still.
This is the price cap, correct.
So that price cap, though, and the negotiations around this has raised speculation that that was one of the factors in Saudi Arabia's decision to pull 2 million barrels a day off the market. And the president has said he's furious that he's going to retaliate against Saudi Arabia. Is that what happened here?
Well, look, clearly the president said it better than I can, that he was extremely disappointed in the OPEC decision and that he thought it was a mistake. And clearly nobody can argue that it was warranted for any economic reason.
Well, that's what OPEC says.
I understand, but nobody else thinks that it was warranted. And even OPEC, when they announce it 2 million, and then they say, well, we're not actually going to cut 2 million, we're just going to cut 900. And then you look a little deeper, and it's really just about 500. So the impact on the market is not going to be as significant. So this was more of a big political statement that OPEC has made. And look, at the end of the day, the president was disappointed in what OPEC did, but his commitment is to do things here in the United States, where we can have an impact on the American economy, bringing down prices as they have. And look, think about it this way. When I was here last, in June, we were at $120 a barrel of oil and $5 of gasoline. Today, we're at 85. 85.
And Bank of America said today
30%.
they expect an average of $100 a barrel next year. That just came out this morning.
Yes, but in June, Goldman Sachs expected the last quarter of this year to be 140, prices to rise to 140. So the banks keep saying that the price is going to go up. The president keeps taking decisive action here that has led to these lower prices.
These are short-term fixes, the releases.
These are not short-term fixes, Margaret. We've been in this now for 8-9 months. This is almost a year now of higher prices, and the president has taken these actions. So I don't think these are short-term. I understand that the banks make their own analysis, but they haven't been accurate over the time. And what you can measure is that we're down 30% on oil prices, and we're down over $1.20 in the United States on gasoline. And in fact, we're now almost every single week for the last several months, we've seen a decline in gasoline prices in the United States. And so we're working with allies. We're trying to strengthen the American economy while also making sure that our allies' economies are strong as well.
Before I let you go, real quick, are you going to be able to close this deal between Israel and Lebanon that would allow for drilling off their coast?
Well, I think that this is a really great development, a historic agreement between two enemy countries. Lebanon doesn't even recognize the state of Israel. We're going to have a deal. We're going to sign it hopefully this Thursday. And I hope that this continues to our commitment to stability in the region and prosperity for both countries.
Amos, good to have you here. Hope to have you back again soon. We'll be back in a moment. We turn now to the war in Ukraine. First up, our Holly Williams reports from Kyiv.
In the Russian-occupied city of Kherson in southern Ukraine, the authorities installed by Moscow have now ordered all residents to leave ahead of an expected Ukrainian counteroffensive. Kherson was seized by the Russians in the early days of the invasion. Now Ukraine claims that Russia's planning to blow up a hydroelectric dam in the region to slow the Ukrainian military's advance, and has already laid mines, risking a catastrophic flood. Herman Halushenko is Ukraine's energy minister and told us if the Russians destroy the dam, it could even leave a nuclear power plant without water for cooling.
So if the Russians blow the dam, one potential consequence is a nuclear accident.
It could be. It could be.
As Russian forces struggle to hold on to territory they've seized, they've launched a new wave of attacks on Ukraine's cities, including with so-called kamikaze drones. The US says Iran is supplying drones and even has troops on the ground helping the Russians operate them. Ukraine says the main target, with over 300 strikes, is energy facilities. As a harsh winter looms, there have already been blackouts in some parts of the country.
What's the worst case scenario here? Could Ukrainians end up this winter with no heating and no electricity?
I think not, but frankly speaking, it also will depend on how intensive these attacks would be in the future.
Ukraine says what it's still asking for is more air defence systems from its friends in the West.
Ukraine says that Russian strikes on Saturday cut off power to more than 1.4 million households. Margaret.
Holly, thank you. There are currently 100,000 U.S. troops supporting NATO allies in European countries that surround Ukraine. Our Charlie D'Agata spent time with some in Constanța, Romania.
The Screaming Eagles have landed. The 101st Airborne Division deployed on the very edge of NATO territory.
Go, 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 go!
With Colonel Edwin Mathaidis and Brigadier General John Lubis, we board Black Hawk helicopters and head toward the border with Ukraine. Specifically trained to hit the ground fighting. When the call came, the colonel said his soldiers were ready.
And you could see it on their face that all that stuff we had talked about being ready, about training hard, not leaving anything on the table. They had a chance to put it into use, and they're doing that same stuff here today.
Right. It just got real.
It did.
We traversed the Black Sea coast across the water from Russian-held territory in Ukraine and Crimea until we reached the forward operating site, where soon U.S. and Romanian NATO forces were conducting a joint air and ground assault. Live-fire tank and artillery rounds took aim at targets, simulating the battlefields of Ukraine.
This isn't a routine military exercise against a hypothetical enemy. This is a real-life combat scenario against a very real enemy, one that's not so far away.
We're about 250 miles from the front line of Russian troops. And the way we are dispersed right now, we are ready to transition from our current locations where we're currently at to combat operations on order.
It's the first time the 101st has been headquartered in Europe since the D-Day landings, seen here with then-General Dwight Eisenhower, prepared to defend European allies again if called upon to fight. Now, almost 80 years later, the 101st is back.
Go, go, go!
Making a mark in history once more.
Those military exercises come at a time when broader NATO nuclear exercises are underway, now entering the second week. They involve 60 aircraft from 14 countries, including U.S. B-52 bombers. They were scheduled long before the war in Ukraine began. Margaret?
Charlie D'Agata, thank you. We'll be right back. That's it for us today. Thank you for watching. Until next week. For Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.